3, hit it!
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to today's Caffeine for the Soul. And the quote I'm about to share with you is the quote that I put at the very front of my book, The Inside Out Revolution, which I don't think it's just because of this quote, but of all the books I've written, it's the one that's sold the most copies. It's in over 20 languages around the world. And it begins with a quote from the Scottish mystic Syd Banks. And he said, if the only thing people learned was not to be afraid of their experience, that alone would change the world. I'm going to say it again. If the only thing people learned was not to be afraid of their experience, that alone would change the world. Now, the reason that I fell in love with that quote is it points to a fundamental truth about humans. We scare ourselves with our own experience. We're scared to be scared. We're scared to be angry. We're scared to be sad. We're scared to be too happy. We're scared to worry, but we're scared not to worry. We overreact to our own experiences, which in reality, if we let them, would just come and go. But we worry, if I have this experience, if I'm sad for too long, it means I'm depressed. If I'm this for too long, it means I'm anxious. If I'm this for too long, and so we spend an extraordinary amount of our time trying to prevent certain experiences and cultivate other ones. Because we're scared that if we have the wrong experience, we'll get stuck in it, or we won't survive it. And because all that energy and attention is being spent on trying to control our experience, we do crazy things out in the world. Because we think our experience comes from the behavior of others, or from what other people have, or what we imagine other people might do or think, we try to control or destroy other people to prevent them from doing the things that we think would give us an experience that we're afraid of having. But our experience only and always comes from within. We experience our thinking, the feeling of our thought, not the feeling of circumstances, not the feelings of other people's thinking and other people's behavior. And so if we weren't afraid of our experience, if we were free to just experience our experience, we would be so much more attuned to the world and to the people around us. Now, I obviously was very impacted by that idea. I wrote a whole book around it. And that's why I was so surprised a couple of months ago when I was out walking my dogs and I heard the quote in a completely new way. Now, the quote was the same. If the only thing people learned was not to be afraid of their experience, that alone would change the world. But for the first time, I realized I had heard that as meaning, therefore, I must accept all experiences equally, and I must have no preferences for one experience over another experience, and in an ideal world, I would be so spiritual and neutral about everything that I would be just as happy to be angry as sad and scared as and alone as connected, and it sort of, the way I interpreted it had inadvertently trapped me in this never-ending quest for divine neutrality. And for some reason that night, walking my dogs, I heard the quote clean. And all Syd said was, if the only thing people learned was not to be afraid of their experience, That alone would change the world. Not to love their experiences equally, not to not have experiences, not to embrace all experiences, not to do any of these wonderful sounding spiritual things I had made up in my head, but simply not to be afraid. Well, if I wasn't afraid of my experience, it doesn't mean I wouldn't pay attention. It doesn't mean I wouldn't prefer some experiences to others. But what it does mean is if I wasn't afraid of my experience, I would actually experience it. And if I actually gave space to experience things, I would learn about them. And if I actually learned about them, one of the things I realized quite quickly about experience is it comes and goes all by itself. It's untethered. It's freestanding. I can have an experience regardless of circumstances, for better or worse. One of the most dramatic examples of that, if you go to my website, you can find a video clip of me working with a man in a coaching intensive. And his experience in this coaching intensive was, the story he told me was of him having stage fright after a talk. So he'd given a talk. He was trained as a public speaker. And he was giving a talk, and the talk went great. And then he had full-blown stage fright after he came off stage, and it really baffled him. And I was able to point out to him that, well, the reason that wasn't even strange, I mean, unusual, sure, but that it didn't mean anything was wrong, is because we experience thought. And it just so happened that he didn't have the scary thoughts until after he came off stage. And in that seeing, he saw a whole host of things about places where he had scared himself, where he didn't need to scare himself anymore. And in many ways, it set him free. Well, in the same way, when we start to see experience as it is, not something to be afraid of, just something that comes and goes with thought, then to a large extent, we can flow with experience and continue to invite nicer and nicer experiences without ever having to try to control our thinking or other people or the world in order to have or avoid the experience that we want. And if you have a planet where people allow each other their experience, where they don't feel the need to blame or project their experience onto another group or another person, you have a world where people inherently get along. And that's why not being afraid of your experience is an unexpected way to change the world. Have fun, learn heaps, happy exploring, and I'll talk with you soon.